Hello, everyone. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is a new series of conversations with clinical business operations professionals to let you tell your story in your own words, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm Brian Kelly. I'm the Senior VP of Business Development at Strategikon, and I'll be your host for this session. I have a couple of housekeeping items for you before we get going. If you'd like to ask a question of our guest or myself, you can please enter your question into the text session of the GoToWebinar that you see on the side panel. We'll be monitoring these throughout the talk, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible towards the end of our session. Additionally, if any of you are interested in telling your own story, please let us know through that same tab, and we'll follow up with you later on to get you scheduled for a future session. We'll be doing these about once a month. This session will be recorded, so if any of you would like to listen again or forward to your colleagues for viewing, we will send the replay within a day or so, and we'll get that link out to you. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest, Ms. Mary Maurer. Mary is the VP of Clinical Operations at Escape Bio. Mary is an accomplished pharmaceutical and biotechnology professional who has successfully built and integrated high-performance teams. Mary has expertise in strategic and operations planning, work process and infrastructure development, regulatory inspection readiness, patient recruitment and retention, and clinical trial budget forecasting and management. She applies her capabilities across multiple therapeutic areas with a focus in rare and ultra-rare disease indications. Escape Bio is a precision for medicine company developing targeted therapeutics for genetic neurodegenerative diseases. So welcome, Mary. Thank you for joining me for our first Straight Talk session.
Thanks, Brian.
To kick things off, thank you. To kick things off, the last time we spoke, you raised a very interesting contrast between the clinical development pathways for rare and ultra-rare disease development versus those in more prevalent indications. And one of the starkest contrasts you mentioned was in the planning and budgeting process. Would you please tell us a little bit about your experience in that regard?
Yes, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this. You know, in the rare diseases, the clinical development pathway is very narrow. Doesn't mean it doesn't take a long time, but it's very narrow in the aspect that you're going to do a phase 1, you're going to probably do a phase 2, 3, and then you're going to file. So you really have to be, you know, it's quite narrow. Inspection readiness is going to be key because your overall NDA is going to be quite, you know, small in regarding the number of studies that you have to do. And budgeting is going to be a really important aspect of it because you're really going to have to get that right from the get-go. And that's where, you know, Clinical Maestro has been really something that's a great tool for me because all of the scenario plannings that through the portfolio that you can do because of that kind of, you know, narrow development pathway in the rare and ultra-rare disease indications versus, you know, other experience that I have, such as, you know, in the development of Cialis, which was, you know, obviously, you know, that NDA was over 65 clinical trials. You know, most of them were small phase 1s, but, you know, drug, alcohol, food effect studies. But in the rare disease, it's quite different.
Excellent, thank you. We have a poll question that we're going to put up on the screen. We'd like to hear from our audience about your challenges with business operations, and we've got, that'll pop up on the screen. We'll have about 30 seconds for you to answer it. So let me just read off the questions for everyone. What is your biggest challenge in developing a clinical trial budget? Creating a new baseline scenario from older information? Waiting for my providers to send me ballpark estimates? Inability to have a current fair market value for comparison against your estimates? Or creating multiple scenarios and analyzing the differences? So Mary and I aren't allowed to vote here, so we'll just wait a few seconds and we'll pop up the results, and hopefully that'll spark a few comments about what we see. And Mary, when we get back to the conversation, there probably are other challenges that you've experienced, and I know that we talked about one or two, so feel free to add to the list if needed.
Okay, I think definitely, baseline scenarios is really current fair market value for, comparison is really important for us in being able to provide, really try to get that accurate budget for the study, so that you don't have all those change order out, and sort of, why didn't you estimate this correctly?
Excellent, thank you. So I'm just trying to share the results here. Karen, I'm going to make you the presenter. So if you have those results, you'd be able to share them. Excellent. So it looks like, let's see the results here. Sorry about that. I've got myself in the way. So 80% of the people chose creating multiple scenarios and analyzing the differences. And I think, Mary, to your point, that's a big one. In many of the conversations I've been having, there's the other people who responded chose the waiting for the ballpark estimates. A lot of the conversations I've had with sponsors as well as service providers are around the whole concept of ballparks and how burdensome that whole process is, Mary. So feel free to comment on that one and actually kick off the next question that I have for you.
So do you want me to talk about waiting for providers to give me ballpark estimates?
I think just comment freely on whatever you think is
okay.
From your experience.
Since most of the responders talked about creating multiple scenarios, I'll go to, and I'll address that one first, and then I'll go to the ballpark estimates. One of the things that, especially in the rare and ultra rare diseases, and actually, I think it applies pretty much across the board, is creating those scenarios. And really, that's one of the things that Clinical Maestro does great. It does a lot of other great things too, but and I use doing that scenario planning a lot, where you get a baseline scenario, so put together sort of an estimate, kind of an assumption sheet, and apply that, set a base case, and then start doing scenario planning. If you're going to do multiple countries, or if you're going to adjust from, say you're going to do 60 patients, and then you want to do 120 patients, and what does that look like, and the number of sites, and you can adjust it, and you can do multiple scenario plannings within Clinical Maestro, and it can give you really a range and where you can really analyze where the differences are. And it also shows you when you do these different scenario planning, a clinical trial, you've got that ramp up at the beginning, right? Where you've got a lot of activities that you're, where dollars are being spent. And then you get into the conduct and it kind of levels out. And then you have that another ramp out at the end of the study. You can see that within Clinical Maestro when you do these different scenario plannings. So if you're changing the number of sites from 15 to 30, you can see how that is going to affect not only just the budget impact, but actually where those dollars are being spent. And that really can help you analyze, where the dollars are put. And accounting loves that because it's the accruals piece, right? Accounting really wants to see where that accruals are, where those dollars are going to be spent and when. And that's something that I know if each of us goes through, accruals versus actuals, those numbers on a monthly basis. So it's really helpful.
Excellent. Yeah. And you mentioned in our previous conversation the notion of hotspots and seeing where those expenses are going to land with respect to multiple projects or programs.
Absolutely. And actually, this is where you can really take the different scenarios and apply them to across projects, so that you can see where those resources are going to be, across projects, where you can really cut through, see those hotspots, see where, maybe we need some more resources here, where those dollars are going to be spent. And then it helps you analyze and then adjust your your budgeting and your forecasting, provides, senior management, where those, how the dollars are going to be spent, but also where there's going to be probably some crunch time and you're going to need to apply additional resources for the programs.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. We got a good question on the panel here that I just wanted to bring in because it dovetails into the next question that I had, but the questioner asks, I know this could be a whole discussion topic in and of itself, but I'm curious how Escape Bio views fair market value.
Yeah, fair market value. That one's a little trickier for us, because we're in the rare disease space. So we have to kind of really reach out and do a lot more, analysis on that, because the rare disease space, you really have to, it's a little trickier of a question, and I'm to be able to find those, the fair market values, just because of the disease space and the rare of this patient population. You have to, identify patients a good year in advance before you do studies, be able to do the patient finding work, and then be able to, a lot of times you're going to have to bring patients and you're going to have to do travel. So fair market value becomes a little bit of a trickier item when you're in that rare disease space.
Yeah, I understand. I guess it's more of a question of the benchmarking, and you have benchmarking available for your more standard services that are across all indications, and then you'll have specialty benchmarks, if you will, related to those procedures that are unique to rare disease. So probably a combination of those will get you as close as you can get to an FMV, I would think.
Absolutely. Yep. Excellent.
So my next question kind of follows along the same theme. In a slightly different method, I think. So at Escape, and I know elsewhere in your career, you've been involved with development partnership discussions, and as well as due diligence exercises related to fundraising. So planning, budgeting, fundraising, cooperation or partnership with larger organizations. In most cases, I think you were dealing with much larger organizations. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience in those areas?
Absolutely. A lot of times when you're in a small company, privately held, you do a lot of development partnerships with larger organizations. And because in the small companies, we have that institutional knowledge within the particular indication that maybe a larger partner doesn't have. And so what we've done is we've developed a budget, and I'm going to just give you an example of where we had a partnership with a large pharmaceutical company, and we presented a budget for a phase 2 study, and they just looked at it and they said, no way, this is not, we can do it for much, where did these numbers come from? So actually working with, Strategikon, we did a deep dive. The beauty of it is that the algorithms within Clinical Maestro are bottoms up. So, for a particular activity, such as an ICF development, you're going to have your CRA write it, you're going to have your clinical project manager review it, then it's going to go to your medical director, and then it's going to go to legal, and all of those have different fees, right? But it's all built in as a blended fee within the algorithm. And so what we were able to do is do that analysis from a really deep dive from that bottoms up indication and provide that to our partner. And once we provided that with the partner and we gave them those numbers, and they looked at it and they came back like 2 weeks later and they said, yeah, you guys are right, you're spot on, this is exactly how much it's going to cost. So it was a great tool for us to be able to really show and demonstrate that, this budget is really what the budget is going to be. So
yeah. That's excellent, and happy to hear that for sure. And I think my next question was kind of related to the your prior experience before using, Maestro for this exercise, and it relates to those internal discussions that are along the same lines. So now you're talking to your CEO or your senior management who are, answering to your investors, and how much is this next program going to cost us in the next year or two? And the ballpark word, the B word, is used a lot. So, can you give me a quick and dirty estimate, back of the envelope type estimate, of course. And so, talk about how you would do that, and then, of course, what happens, next.
Right. So, typically we always get, okay, well, give me a back of the envelope of what the study's going to cost, right? And so you sort of, from your experience, and you put together what it's going to cost, and you provide that, gets into the budget, and then 2 weeks later, and this is just a really relevant example, 2 weeks later, CEO comes back and says, okay, now give me the details. I now want it to be, I want to know all the ins and outs. And that's where, using a tool like Clinical Maestro, you can actually quickly and be able to provide those details, to be able to support it. That back of the envelope sort of calculation that you needed to do. So it's really important internally, as you know, in private companies, we're all, and even public companies, they're always looking for fundraising and investors, and working with the investor community, and being able to provide really good benchmarked budgets on programs is really essential, and not just for this one-off or this on. You can do it based on a whole program, and based on your, you take your whole program timeline and put it together with your estimates, and you can actually put down a whole program budget. And I think that that's really, from my experience, when we're doing annual budgets, or when we're doing mid-year reforecasting, those are all really, really important tools for us to do.
Thanks, Barry. I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit on part of your answer, and it really relates to the aspect of planning that's not necessarily budgetary, but time-based. So someone had a question. Can you please speak to timelines and if the system is being used with large sponsors? And certainly part of your planning process relates to the duration for activities. And can you talk about that dimension of your planning process?
Yeah, so we, I think all of us employ, MS Project, and we put together our timelines on when we're going to, on our programs. And within Clinical Maestro, then you put in those timelines, into there, and then, you can budget out, timelines. We also, really important, setting expectations on timelines. And using industry standard timelines that I know I've developed, and other folks have developed, industry standard timelines that we can also put into Clinical Maestro, so that we can show that you're going to start spending money 5 to 6 months before that first patient in, right, or first subject in, and that's where you can really start developing those timelines. And the Clinical Maestro actually has that embedded, that you're going to start spending money about 5 to 6 months prior to that first subject in. And that's an important key. Also putting in some standard timelines of, after last subject in, how many weeks to database lock, when are you going to get top line results? All of that kind of can be incorporated into your budget through Clinical Maestro.
Thank you. There have been a couple of product-specific questions that I'll just address briefly, but then there's a point related to that last question, Mary, that I'll bring up and have you answer again. So where did the original costs come from, and how are those entered into Clinical Maestro? Does Maestro allow you to input actuals into the system? And so I'll just quickly address those. The data that's in Clinical Maestro is been collated and aggregated over the course of several years, and it contains nearly $6 billion worth of CRO service or provider service proposals. So there's actual data there's data from more than 80 countries related down to the activity-based procedures themselves. So the labor categories, the labor rates, the duration for each task. So it's really a standardized, if you will, set of tasks related to clinical trial services that create that fair market value engine that you can use to plan and create scenarios, compare scenarios. The correction to the question I just asked was, and obviously the time that it takes to complete a task is part of that benchmarking, which is why I asked about timing versus cost. There's an actual correction to the question: how long does it take to produce a budget in different scenarios within Maestro? So Mary, I'll let you answer that one.
I think it's how you want to use the services the Strategikon provides. So what I do is I actually use their services to help provide to create the budgets. That for me is more effective than for me to go in and learn it to the level that Strategikon knows. So that helps me. But if you want, you can do it at every level that you want. You can get in there and work it out yourself. For me, I find that I can quickly produce something by working with the great folks at Strategikon to help me produce the budgets in a timely manner.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And so Mary's being very nice to us, but we do offer an operator mode where we can actually create the budgets and deliver them to you in a matter of 2 or 3 business days. So that's certainly something for smaller companies who have fewer staff or just need something very quickly for a fundraise, and you don't have time or don't need to buy the software to do it yourself. So that's certainly something we could take advantage of. There's 2 questions again related to the product. I'll answer quickly. Does Clinical Maestro have a list of CROs that sponsors can work with? We're not necessarily a marketplace. However, almost any CRO you can think of has produced proposals and submitted them via Clinical Maestro to sponsors. So we certainly know who all the sponsors are and can help answer any questions that anyone may have about expertise. So if you need some unbiased opinions, you can certainly reach out directly to us. There's another question: could grant plan be used to enter cost data into Clinical Maestro? And yes, it can. The benchmarking data that's currently within Maestro does not currently contain site procedures, which of course you can find in grant plan or grant manager. That information can be input into Maestro and become part of the global plan for your project or for your program. We are actually working to actively collect site procedure data. So if you're a sponsor or a CRO and you want to participate in that initiative, we'd love to hear from you, because by the end of this year, we'll have a sufficient set of site procedural data that we would be able to share within our platform. So that's something else that's happening here. So Barry, you talked about that ballpark and working with your internal groups to come up with that estimate quickly. At what point do you migrate from the ballpark to the detailed budget, and does it always happen? And how difficult is that for you, I guess? And then along those same lines, tell us a little bit about your experience with collaboration. Internally, you need expertise from colleagues, or you need some review and feedback on what you've created, and you need it quickly. So how does that work?
So addressing the first one, when we do the ballpark to the detailed, usually that's when we're really going to be setting the budget for that program. Usually those come annually. By the end of the year, you're usually working on your next year budget to be approved by the board, and that's when you really start to anchor those in, those costs in. Although it's always nice to really be able to plan, the forward plan as much as possible as well. So there's usually that's anchored in it, usually by an annual, and then probably, mid-year we always do a reforecast to help seal down budgets, which we're going to be working into already, starting, for our mid-year reforecasting as well. And then how I collaborate internally is we have basically working meetings with our, account staff, our finance folks, but then we also have a governance process at Escape Bio where we actually either monthly or on an ad hoc when needed, we actually present to the executive team and the CEO and the CFO. And that's how we collaborate and get their feedback and buy-in on our budgets.
Excellent, thank you. So we have less than 5 minutes. I just wanted to address one final question that we have from the audience, and it's can you input actuals into Clinical Maestro? And not 100% sure what's meant by actual, so I'll answer part of that, and then Mary, if you have comments, I'll allow you to elaborate. There is a module within Clinical Maestro called Lead, wherein you can load a contract. So essentially you put something through your planning process. However, using Maestro or otherwise, you source for that service provider proposal, you choose one and you create the contract. You can actually create the contract and load it within Clinical Maestro, and then you'll be able to track that over time. Having your providers, from the sponsor's perspective, you can have your providers enter their actual monthly activities directly into Clinical Maestro. And it relates to something you just mentioned, Mary, about reforecasting. So over time, we all know change orders are just a reality based on all the moving parts within a clinical trial. So the lead module and the ability to have your actuals tracked there and track your out of scope activities would enable you to very quickly and easily see and approve and create a change order that can kind of go back through the process again. So happy to hear any comments you have, Mary, about that whole aspect of clinical research.
Well, change orders are inevitable. You can plan as much as you can, but as we know, if it can happen, it will happen in a clinical trial. So, and as data emerges, you need to be nimble and change. And so having the actuals in there through the different modules, the lead module can really help you with that change order. Again, we have that governance process within Escape where when we get a change order, we're able to look at what was budgeted and now what's the new change order and how that affects the overall budget in a very granular way. I mean, literally on a month-to-month basis. So it's really helpful in that aspect.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. This is an exciting series, and we're happy to have you as our first speaker. This took a lot of time, and I know you're very, very busy. So again, our gratitude to you and to all the attendees who joined us on the webinar. I hope you found the discussion valuable. Please watch for future Straight Talks. We will be doing these on a monthly basis. We'll be inviting experts from the clinical business operations world to join us for hopefully thought-provoking and useful conversations. We will send out a link of this recorded session, and we'll be looking forward to more participants joining us in the future. But again, really do want to thank you, Mary, very much, and hope everyone enjoyed the talk, and we'll look forward to speaking with everyone again soon.
Great. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.